Change isn't just coming, it's already here. This is Ask for Change podcast, hosted by leadership expert Meredith Elliott Powell. Brings you weekly conversations with leaders and experts who are redefining success in a world of disruption. Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into competitive advantage. This is Meredith Elliott Powell, and welcome to the last episode of Ask for Change in 2025. We're just really thinking about what it really takes to turn uncertainty to competitive advantage as we head in to 2026. And I have a powerful guest for you today. I have none other than Jake Stahl. Now, Jake is just really such an interesting background. He is what is known as a sales neurostrategist. We're going to need to get him to explain that. Author of the book, Own the Room, which I'm going to want him to talk a lot about today. And it's basically how you unpack the psychology behind influence, communication, and behavior change to be more effective in business, really going beyond the tactics to the brain level neuroscience stuff. Welcome to the show, Jake. Super excited to have you here.
Meredith, this is such an honor. Thank you for having me.
So I think we need to start with really just what is a sales neurostrategist?
Yeah, so neurostrategy is a term that I coined and trademarked, and it's the combination of using behavioral psychology, social psychology, and neurolinguistic programming to create messaging that is simply unforgettable.
Nice. And so it's this whole idea, I want to talk a little bit about your book, Own the Room. It's done phenomenally well as it's been released. But what do you mean by own the room? Let's level set right there and really get everybody on. And why does that even matter?
So Meredith, there's a philosophy that I have that we all have two profiles. There's the one we put on LinkedIn, the one that's dressed up with all of our accolades and is, all gussied up for a picture. But there's another profile, and it's the one that kind of sits behind a person's eyes, and it's the one that makes all the decisions. It's the one that responds to pricing and fear and is conditioned by bad, past decisions that were made. And many times, as a matter of fact, 95% of the time, when we enter a room, we speak to that first profile. We speak to the one that's sitting in the chair, that's got the MBA, that has the budget to spend on what you have to offer, when who we should be talking to is the one behind the eyes. In other words, if I could read the caption over their head that's doing all the unspoken stuff upstairs, that's the person we want to talk to. So when I say own the room, I mean speaking to that second profile, the one that appeals to their fears and their joys and everything that makes up a decision that they're about to make.
Do we naturally resist change? I mean, is that's really, if you're coming in and you're trying to sell me something, is my natural bend to resist it?
I don't think the natural bend is to resist. I think the natural bend is to go with conditioning. And what I mean by that is when I've made a similar decision in the past, what decision did I make that led to a good response? And a great example is we all do this. Somebody will mention a price tag, and what runs through our head is that's too high. Maybe next quarter. Oh, I should talk to my spouse. That's not worth it. I tried that before and it didn't work. So I think, Meredith, one thing I've proven over the years is that we're a victim of our conditioning, not resistant to change.
So how do we use neuroscience, or how does someone like you use neuroscience to help us begin to change that pathway?
Well, here's the scary part. Depending on what study you look at, about 80% of our communication is nonverbal. So if we're not, that's by some studies. I've seen it go from 60 to 85%. The general consensus is 80%. So if we're ignoring what that other person's body is saying, a gesture, a sit back in a chair, maybe a crossed hand, we're ignoring 80% of their message to us. And in my book, Own the Room, we talk a lot about my experience with that and coaching to watching for those changes. And Meredith, I'm not even talking little stuff like a wince. I'm talking like a folding of hands, a tapping of a pen on the desk. All of that tells us something, and we ignore it at our peril.
So, I mean, I do agree with you that it's that I say often, so often, I speak quite a bit about the fact that we make a decision about somebody before they even open their mouth. I mean, I really believe
Yes.
like there's an energy you carry into the room. So, talk a little bit. I'm assuming that Own the Room is basically the practice, a lot of the work that you do. How did you even start to bring neuroscience into the sales or leadership programs?
Yeah. So I had an illness many, many years ago that took me out of the marketplace for a long time. And when I came back into the marketplace, I assumed that my past would just kind of carry me back in. I'd be good to go, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. And I had to reinvent who I was and how I got into rooms. And one thing that always startled me was that a star, a celebrity, if they said something, people just kind of took it at face value, regardless of their background, their credentials, regardless of anything they may have done in their past. And it got me thinking, it's more about a signal that you send or a way that you show up more than what you say. So I got interested in a headshot. I got interested in social media posts and what's influencing people before I even get into the room. And I found out some really startling things. For instance, if you take a headshot and you put it out on social media, psychologists say there's 3 things that help you establish trust with your headshot alone before you even talk to a person. And those 3 things are posture.
Wow.
Are you sitting straight up or leaning forward? Do you have a genuine smile? Like you're showing crow's feet, bonus point for showing a few teeth in your smile. But the third is the cool one. They say a slight to the head shows that you trust the other person and that by you trusting them, they should trust you. And it has to do with the tilt exposes your jugular a little bit, which is a very vital component for us. And if you trust enough to show your jugular, that person's going to trust you. This has been proven time and again. So even with your headshot, you are persuading people and you're learning to own the room before you step into it.
I love that persuading people. So do you think that that neuroscience takes even a larger role in the age of AI?
Well, I think it becomes more important because in AI, we tend to lose a little bit of who we are, right? We're giving up a little bit of control of our messaging to the AI component. So I think in order to keep our humanity or our authenticity, it's important to understand exactly what we're triggering in the other people with an AI message. Are they going to take it good or bad? Do they know it's us? And Meredith, I think the rule of thumb is you can use AI for outreach, but eventually you've got to talk to somebody. So you better know what you're doing.
I would definitely agree with that. So what are some of the steps we can take to begin to own the room?
So the first thing is notice everything that takes place. And what I mean by that is if somebody sits back in their chair, notice it. If somebody gives a heavy sigh, notice it. If they tap their pen, notice it. But the second step is call it out. So Meredith, I notice you leaned back in your chair. What are you thinking? Help me unpack. Did I hit a nerve? So notice it when you do it. And as I illustrate in the book, there were a lot of instances where people really did strike something. And when they asked what it was, they found out what the true objection was. Hey, you know what? It has nothing to do with cost. I actually got burned on something like this last year, and I just don't want to walk that road again. So noticing is a big, big piece of it, because if you don't notice it, and you just try to push through it, you're going to lose the sale. You've already been forgotten.
Is it a matter that people don't feel heard? I mean, I'm wondering if, like, I think one of the most important things we can do in today's marketplace is to make people feel heard and valued. I think in a marketplace like this, it's incredibly important. So when we tap into those triggers, for lack of a better way to put it, is it that we're making people feel heard?
Yeah, for sure. And Meredith, you and I both know from being out there in the communication arena that not everybody can communicate at the same level.
Right.
So it's almost incumbent upon us to be able to notice when something other than verbal communication is taking place. I'll give you a great example. I was on a Zoom call with a potential prospect. This was a couple of months ago. And the woman came on and she had a gorgeous pair of glasses and they matched her earrings. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I said, I really like your glasses and you have earrings. Well, immediately she started playing with her wedding ring, taking it off, putting it back on, twisting the ring. And I had obviously triggered something.
Yeah.
So I had to redirect and reframe to get us back on track. But I would argue most people would miss things like that and just continue to push through. So yes, being heard is something that is extremely important, but it's hearing what's not being said that sometimes is more important than what is being said.
So when you made the comment about the earrings and you made the comment, about her glasses and the matching, and she started playing with her wedding ring, did that trigger you that maybe you'd hit a nerve that you didn't want to hit and you directed it a different way? Yeah.
Yeah. It made me think, did she take it as something more than a compliment? Did that make her insecure? Did she love her earrings and glasses, but it got her more attention than she wanted? So yeah, the trigger was a big piece of it. And we actually break that down in the book, that you send a signal, you trigger something in someone else, and then it's incumbent upon you to be able to reframe the conversation.
Right.
So I had to reframe it back to what we started with to get us back on track so that we could kind of forget the compliment that I gave. Because, you do it innocently, but you're not sure what you're triggering. And
yeah. So it sounds like in today's marketplace, if we want to own the room, we need to be going into every room hyper aware. Would that be true?
It would be. And the term hyper aware, I want to make sure everybody understands this, that you do not have to be a master at noticing everything. You can actually just practice being on a Zoom call, watching a replay of your Zoom call, and just watching for body signs that you may have missed. And what's amazing is the more you practice this, the more you can't unsee it. Then all of a sudden you're like, I see everything. Yeah. And that's better than seeing nothing. So looking at that, understanding the trigger, which you use beautifully, and then understanding you need to reframe the conversation is really important. And Meredith, I honestly think reframing is something that should be taught in high school. That is such an important part of the communication process.
Yeah. I want to talk, because it seems like this really goes with this whole idea of owning the room, and I've heard you speak about it, is what exactly is influence, and why does influence matter?
Well, I think influence is a misunderstood term. A lot of people feel influence is saying the right terms and persuading them and getting them to say yes twice so they say yes a third time. And you know what? In a way, it is that. But influence, in my opinion, is more about just understanding what the other person needs to hear. Not something you want to force down their throat, but what they need to hear in order to make a decision. And that requires preparation beforehand. I need to know what's going to influence them. And if I get really good at it, when I step into a room, I can adjust on the fly. I can see their bodily reactions. I can redirect the conversation. I can anchor a thought. I can transfer emotion. But influence to me is just about guiding somebody down the path that they want to go down in a way that is best suited to their learning style. Nothing more than that. And I want to make it clear, this is not about manipulation. This is about working with the way their mind works and helping them make a decision.
And where does neuroscience fit into to influence?
Well, I can't speak much to the neuroscience piece as to how that all works, but when it comes to the neurostrategy piece with the trigger points and the hook points, I can say that according to neurolinguistic programming, most of us process in a certain way. So it boils down to the way we describe things, the way we process things. So I'll give you, for instance, neurolinguistic programming gets you to look at eye motion. And according to that, 90% of eye movements mean the same thing with people. There's a 10% variant. But if you understand the neuroscience and the neurostrategy piece, you understand that most people are going to respond to fear of loss. Most people are going to respond to motivation. Most people have been conditioned to think a certain way. So in my eyes, Meredith, business development or being a leader comes down to three things: perception, conditioning, and coding. How are you perceived by that person and how do you perceive them? How would they normally respond to a stimulus? In other words, how are they conditioned? And how are they coded? We're all coded a certain way to respond to fear, to respond to gratitude. If you can master those three things, influence is a given.
But so many of us are totally blind to our perception, to how we are perceived by people. I know that because I do a lot of 360s on leaders. How do you get honest with yourself around that?
Oh man, that's another couple of podcasts right there. I think honesty is a big piece. And I think getting honest feedback, you talked about 360s.
Yeah.
Is how willing are you to take the input of other people who are being unabashedly honest about who you are and what you do? And that's a curtain that's very, very difficult to pull back.
Yeah.
So perception to me is one of those where I have 5 people I rely on to give me full, honest opinions. Like I'll have them listen to my podcast or I'll have them look through a course. And I just know when they give me feedback, they're going to be honest. If it stinks, they're going to tell me it stinks.
Yeah.
And by surrounding yourself with those type of people, in my opinion, that's one of the best ways to improve. You just have to leave your ego at the door.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest mistakes you think that, I'm going to ask it 2 ways. First, I want to know with salespeople, the biggest mistakes they make when they're in sales conversations, but also then leaders as they are engaging with team members or peers, some of the biggest mistakes you think they make.
I think one of the biggest mistakes salespeople and leaders make is that there's a one-size-fits-all approach. If I have a script that's empathetic and friendly and takes their emotions into play, and I just use that across everybody, it's just going to work. And the fact is, it doesn't. When you look at sales scripts, I'm a firm believer that sales scripts will work in about 10 to 20% of the population. And that's largely justified by the fact that the close rate in many sales professions is 10 to 20%. But Meredith, we never use sales scripts with other people. I'm not using one with you now. I don't use one with my wife. I don't use one with my kids. And yet we somehow think that as a leader, if I use it with my colleagues or as a salesperson, if I use it out in the public, it's going to work 100% of the time.
That's so true.
So I think part A is don't use a sales script.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part B
and then what about, oh no, go ahead, part B.
So part B is AI is our savior. If I just use AI to come up with my wording and my emails and my messages, everything is going to be great. And, it's great for some things. I'm a huge fan of AI. My company is an AI product. But I think there's a certain limit, and we need to get that pendulum to swing back to the point where we use it wisely and not use it as a substitute for valid communication.
Okay. I agree with you. I think that it's in fact, I think people that learn to integrate AI into their human connection and behavior are going to be the ones that really stand out this year. And then talk a little bit about as leaders, what are some of the mistakes that leaders make as it relates to, neuroscience or not picking up on these clues and things that they need to pick up on?
One of the things that I'm a firm believer on is that we don't use certain speech techniques very well as leaders. I'll give you an example. If you're a leader and you're not giving people a reason for what you're deciding, you're missing the boat. In other words, use because with all of your directives. We should do X and Y, or we need to do Y and Z because. Think of it this way, Meredith. From the time we're born, we are raised to think there's cause and effect. Dad, why is the sky blue? Mom, why don't fish drown? There's all these why questions, and we're raised, they don't because of X. They do this because of Y.
Right.
And yet when we get into leadership positions, we often feel as though we don't have to justify why something's being done. So one of the rules I give all my clients is always use the word because. The second thing I think with leaders that we need to be aware of is there's a huge difference between a noun and a verb. Stay with me here. So if I say to you...
Okay, I'm with you. I remember that from English class, so I'm with you.
So if I say to you, I love dogs, that is a verb, right? If I say I'm a dog lover, that's a noun. But they have two distinctly different interpretations, right? I love dogs means that I love them now. I may not have always, and I may not in the future. But if I say I'm a dog lover, that implies that it's always been. Instead of I'm a painter, that's better than I love to paint. So when I hear people do a value proposition, they say, I do marketing. That's significantly different than I'm a marketer. Yeah. And they've shown this in studies with kids. Instead of telling them to clean up their mess, which doesn't work, that's the verb, they encourage the kids to become the teacher's helper, which is a noun. They're now part of a select group. You're giving them reason, and they're now part of something bigger than themselves.
I love that.
So understand the noun versus the verb. So if I have a group of people and I want them to go out and vote, I don't say go out and vote. I say become a voter.
Right.
Now, if you think about it, the opposite of this is true too. So a lawyer is going to go into a courtroom and say, my client's not a criminal. Noun, he just made a couple of bad decisions, which is the verb.
Right.
So simple things like this, if leaders think about them and use them appropriately, it can change the entire focus of a message to their people.
Yeah, I think just one of the most powerful things you said there is how much people want to belong and they want to be a part of something. They want an identity. I mean, an identity is so incredibly is so incredibly important. We have a basic human need to want to be a part of something. And I think that's even heightened in the age of uncertainty.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. And in the age of AI, where we're gradually separating ourselves out further because it's not even us doing the talking now, you get even further separation. It's not, am I reading a LinkedIn profile? It's who wrote the profile. So I think there's degrees of separation that are increasing now, and we need to master ways to bring them back together.
Yeah. Jake, it's hard to believe, but we are about at the end of this podcast. And I always like to end with two questions. I want you to tell people how to find the book, how to follow you, how to get your information into your podcast is fabulous, how to listen to it, how to order the book. And also, I always like to end, especially as we're headed here into 2020, 26 is when this will technically come out. What is your greatest advice for somebody's out there struggling with the uncertainty that's out there? What is your greatest advice with how they turn uncertainty to their greatest competitive advantage?
My biggest advice for people is talk to as many people as you can, not as networking, but as intentional networking. So in other words, talk to people that you know and trust to give you feedback. We always say, I'm going to throw it out marketing wise. We're going to do A/B testing, but you're getting input from strangers.
Yeah.
Get the input from people you know and have probably a bigger vested interest in your success than maybe you do. I'm part of a group, Meredith, that when we call each other, the first thing we say when we pick up the phone is, do you want me to listen or are you looking for advice? That way we can level set the conversation and we know exactly what our role is, and then we can help. Find those 5 people. It'll be the best thing you ever did.
Nice. And then how do people find out about you? How do they find out about the book? How do they, listen to your podcast?
So my podcast is Own the Room with Jake Stahl. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. My book that just came out in December of 2025 is Own the Room, How to Communicate to Be Seen, Heard, and Respected. And it goes into a lot of detail on how you can do exactly what we talked about on the podcast today. Notice signals, notice triggers, get people's commitment to action, transfer ideas. On social media, I am Jake the Mind Mechanic. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also read my newsletter, Own the Room, on LinkedIn, and that is by far the best way to reach me. I am Jake Stahl on LinkedIn. I'm the only one that's the CEO of Orchestrate.
All right, Jake, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for a fantastic conversation. Thank you for teaching us all how to own the room. And to the listening audience out there, we'll see you right back here next week for another episode of Ask for Change. And remember, together, we're going to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. I'll see you next week.